start by defining the independent variables. Independent variable is a variable that makes a change in the dependent. In other words, it causes the change. The independent variables are also the x values when you look at a table, or the domain, or the inputs. We have all these names for it. On the other side, we have the dependent variables. The dependent variables are the variable that is changed by the independent. In other words, it is being changed. They are the y values, or the f of x values if you're looking at a function. They are also the range, or the outputs. So let's look at the first example. Example 1, identify the independent and dependent variable of this table. We have two things going on in the table: the number of yoga classes and the total cost. Now, if we look closely at that, we have to compare which one causes a change in the other. In other words, the number of classes we take. Each class we take, we pay for. So each class we take costs us more money. The number of classes will determine our cost. The number of classes changes the number that we pay. So the number of classes will determine the cost, meaning the number of classes will be the independent, the total cost will be the dependent. In our second example, we'll look at equations. So we'll continue the same instructions, identifying the independent and dependent variables. And as we said in the original list, our independent will be the x, our dependent will be the y. Whether it's in this equation on the top or the one in the bottom, which is the f of x. Now we'll explain all this later. This has to do with function notation, which we'll get into in a later unit or later lesson. But for today, just know that either f of x and y are the same thing. And in each of these cases, if we were to think about this, this would be a much easier problem to think about if we take a number and we just plug it in for x. Negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. Negative 15 plus 7 is negative 8. It's much easier to put a number in for x and then determine the y, because the independent determines the dependent. Now finally, in our last example, we'll identify the independent and dependent variables again from the situation. So here it says Aaron earns $5.50 an hour for helping his dad with yard work. To determine how much money he makes, he uses the equation E equals 5.5H, where E is that Aaron's total earnings and H is the number of hours that he worked. So we have H and we have E. And in this case, according to that problem there, we have E equals 5.5H. We would plug something here to determine this. That makes hours the independent, and it makes earnings the dependent. The number of hours you work determine the amount of money that you make. Now if you turn to this page, which will be the next page in your packet, you'll see two columns that look like this that say independent and dependent variables. In the baggie, you're going to get 8 pink cards. Take each card and as a group at your table, separate them and match them up with like variables to determine which one is independent, which one is dependent. After your group is settled on a final decision, go ahead and copy down the cards into your paper. And then go ahead and put the cards back in the baggie and give it back to the sub. Once you've completed copying down the independent and dependent variables, turn in the baggies to the substitute a picture puzzle where you will plot all of the points to create a picture. Once you and your partners have completed the picture and connected all the dots, you may color it if you have time, but before you leave today, make sure you turn it in to the sub. If you don't finish in class, turn it in on Tuesday.